Today's session will have two parts. So part one is mainly kind of discussion present from Geoff and Jo. During that part of the discussion, we will have chat, but things you put into chat, that's really with the idea that Geoff and Jo can pick up that in part two, which is much more kind of interactive Q&A. So please put things in chat in part one, but the idea is that we look at that in part two, so no expectation the presenters pick up that as we go. If during part one you've got any burning questions for clarification, a sort of block question you need to ask it, please raise your hand. I'll keep an eye, spot that, and then pitch that to Jo and Geoff. So at this point, I will pass to Peter to introduce the session properly, and then on to Jo and Geoff.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you to Jo and Geoff in advance. I think we've still got some people joining. But just to say that, really to situate this as part of our Badlands series, and in this we're kind of basically asking whether we've in some ways passed an age of regulatable technology. And we've moved into an age where technology is now so powerful, decentralized network that when we talk about regulation, we at least have to talk about it in some sort of new sense. And I think privacy in some ways is a kind of fulcrum of that question. So I think a very important session. Really grateful to Jo and Geoff, and yeah, enough from me.
Okay, shall I share? Right, just some context. I'm going to try and it was left to me to multitask, not Jo. So this is a developmental thing for me as a male of the species. Okay, so I'm going to run through presenting the slides, and we'll run this as a bit of a almost the intention is to do this almost as a podcast, so a conversation for you to kind of watch, interject in, and we'll have a fuller conversation as was introduced later. So I'm going to try and share my slides now. Just bear with me a minute. I will put them into slideshow. So I'm hoping you can see everything now.
Yeah, that's good.
Excellent. Right, good. So welcome to Beyond the Box, how to reframe digital systems and to make them adaptive, ethical, and alive. And I'm here with Jo. Jo, do you want to introduce yourself, ladies, first?
Sure. And by the way, as Geoff alluded to, thanks for indulging us. The reason why we went podcast here is because selfishly, Geoff and I have talked about doing a podcast for a couple of years. And when we were given the opportunity to do this speaking engagement together, we decided let's try it as a podcast. So this is our first in hopefully, many more of these kind of conversations where you're just going to peek into sometimes our silliness, our informality, our different perspectives, and often very same perspectives.
But I guess what we're saying there is that we saw this community at Cybernetics as kind of the safe space for testing this. Safe. You're a kind of our lab rats. Well, no, not lab rats, probably the wrong word, but this is us.
You're our focus group, our experimental focus group.
You can't unsay it, Geoff.
I've said it now. Yeah, exactly. And this is the point, right? But anyway, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So on to introduction. So I'm Jo Davaris. I'm, if you couldn't tell from my accent, New York area based, New York born and bred. I'm a lawyer and a chief privacy officer, and I've been practicing law for many more years than I want to admit, and privacy for more years than I will admit, about 15 years or so. Coming from financial services and consulting background, and now tech industry. My work has typically lived at that intersection of regulation, trust, technology, and governance. But I've learned more and more every day that to build systems that people can trust, we have to start with something more than compliance. And that's kind of where we want to focus our conversation today, how we can uncheck that box. That's why it's beyond the box, right? It's not just about the box, it's beyond, and how we can build systems that care. So Geoff, give it to you.
That was great, Jo. I'm just going to say I'm Geoff. and I'm English, if you can't tell. This is going to be, and I live in Leicestershire. And apparently I'm an ethicist. I am a professor. I'm a visiting professor at Loughborough University, digital ethics and trust in the business school. So with Peter and cohort, I've been around the block a few times, and I've been a data protection officer for a couple of decades in different capacities and different. I've seen that evolution. So from when data protection wasn't a thing, and I was in a basement, managing records, to it kind of being a boardroom item, and a balance sheet item, thanks to things like GDPR. I've done that through private sector and public sector, so places with money that they won't spend it, and places that don't have money that want to spend it, basically. And I now advise, or I'm honoured to be able to do some advisory work with some large organisations and some small, quite niche startups as well. And I'm curious-minded, and I think that's how I know Jo. Jo and I have met while I was working about 10 years ago, and we are the curious-minded. So I think I didn't want to promote this really as a kind of privacy specialist podcast. We are very much curious-minded to look at the what if, and that's me. And that's why I'm not in a corporate role now, because I used to be annoying and sit at the board and go, why? And people don't always like that. So there'll be lots of this kind of conversation as we progress now. So that's enough about us. Jo, do you want to?
Well, Geoff, I just want to note the fact that you started in a basement. I'm still in a basement right now.
Are you?
Yeah,
wow.
right this very moment. I'm still sitting in a basement. But we wanted to give you that's where I end up having to go when my family needs to hide me away, and I need to be get away from them. It's the basement. So just from an outline perspective of how we thought we talk through our conversation, just to give it some structure. We were going to kick off part one, and in part one are 3 areas. We want to focus a little bit and talk about data and identity, and where has that gone, or where we would like to see it go. Privacy as a system of integrity, and then building upon those two with just how do we rethink governance, how do we rethink regulations and reg tech, and then we'll close part one. And as we said, throughout part one, please offer up chats, questions, things you'd like for us to discuss in part two. Part two doesn't have a lot in it structurally, because it's really going to be informed by the discussion in part one and by your questions, and by some of the prompts that you'll see that we're going to give you.
And I would just add to that, throughout part one as well, we will attempt to run polls. And when I say we, that'll be me, because I'm driving this. So I may need some audience participation. So thank you. Okay.
So I think we can click through the next. I feel like there's another part here.
Yeah.
I had a little fun with the animation here. So this is kind of the theme of our conversation today, is just if we can reframe digital systems as adaptive, ethical, and alive, more as living organisms, not what we are conceiving as more static today for the most part. And so if we want a society, or if we want systems that are more inclusive, that operate more safely, that provide more justice to individuals, how do we rethink systems? And so, in our first part, where we're focused on data and identity, one of the things that we've been talking about, Geoff and I, is just the idea of how a system handles identity. And we're not just talking about your name in the system or your login, right? The idea that in the digital world right now, your identity is defined by patterns, not just your patterns, but patterns that the system assumes. And so your behaviors, your preferences, but also your associations and just some assumptions, it becomes a defined digital data self. And we want to talk through how we think about how that's operating today. When I put my legal hat on, from a legal standpoint, we've been treating data as a commodity. It's something to manage. It's something to protect. That's what the regulations are looking to achieve, right? But when we look at it more ethically, it's much more intimate than the way regulations are defining it to be. It reflects our relationships, our vulnerabilities, even our potential, where we would like to be, right? So when our systems act on flawed data on shallow data, on wrong assumptions, on preconceived notions or notions that we can't even understand, it doesn't just miscalculate, it starts to misrepresent us. And so how do we rein that in? Geoff, before I keep going on and on.
Yeah, no. You've just raised a couple of things, and you've just sparked some thought process in my mind around what I've experienced, and what I've seen in certainly in organizations, certainly large corporates, in respect to philosophy of data. Because you just talked a lot about how the legal is there to protect data as a commodity, and we hear this philosophy, we hear the words data is oil, right, or the new oil it used to be, right, and which to me is quite an agnostic representation of data, because we're just talking about it as if it's just a fossil fuel, a commodity, a something, but we're not really interested in the data itself. It's just something that's going to help me drive the instrument to whatever it is I want to get to, right? You then also said lots of stuff about the complexities of the morality. So suddenly I've got this kind of binary thing around data, 1, 0, and then this complexity of morality, and how data reflects our relationships. And at that point, you made me think of the quote. I think it was Eric Schmidt, used to be CEO of Google, who said, "Data is everything." Yeah, you literally can infer everything from this data, and that's the other philosophy that I see. Because and I tend to see a bit of a blend of the two. Data is a new oil. Data is everything, because, well, frankly, that's quite easy for consultants to sell. And I've been a consultant, so I know this. It's quite an easy conversation to have with a board to almost try and materialize data or give it some tractional value. Actually, it is absolutely everything, and it could be the new oil. Obviously, the third philosophy is probably one that we agenda to, and it's something I've experienced. I worked with the National Health Service on the information governance toolkit, which is a bit of a precursor to privacy, about 20 years ago. It feels like a long time. But there they introduced the concept of pseudonymization, which is now, it's a regulatory, it's global, and that was the understanding that actually maybe we shouldn't know everything. Maybe there's some things around the core. We can understand the health of this individual, but there are some things that are absolutely intimate that we shouldn't know. And they built the concept of pseudonymization in that toolkit. So there's that philosophy too. That's not one that I see running out of systems at boards when I run, when I sit with tech company. I mean, we've sat together, right? This is not the philosophy I see. And it raises a question now, because you talked about identity as well and the protection of that. And I'm going to run this off. If data is everything, right, then what's left of the self? And that's a question I'd like to ask you, Jo, actually, and anyone that can interject on here as well. Things in the chat.
I mean, I think this is the question and the discussion we've been having back and forth, right? So we have had the conveniences of taking advantage of so many different systems and products and tools. And those systems and products and tools are starting to make assumptions about us, right? And in those assumptions that they're making about us, it's more than automation. It becomes something like defining who we are. It's authoring who we are.
Okay, but can I ask you a question? Because you just talked about patterns there, right? But is that you?
That's my question back to you or back to the audience. I don't know if it's me until I've decided it's me. It's almost it's like a biographer writing my biography, but if I have not informed the stories, the use cases, the way I want to be perceived, is it me? If it's basing it just on patterns of who I want to be. I mean, I was alluding this to, and I don't know if this is a good metaphor that clicks or not, but I'm big on personal brand, on who do you want to be and how are you perceived. And sometimes when you do those personal brand kind of perception tests, you get surprised because people are perceiving you in a way that you didn't anticipate. And it means that you have lost something in your personal brand that you need to kind of reharness, right? Take back, rein in, or go with it. And I think it's the same of what we're talking about here. You have to be able to have control over that and decide, am I good with how it's interpreting me? Or do I want to rein it in and have more control over it? But I think control of it should be at the center of it. And right now it doesn't exist.
Okay, so because we talked about protection, and you said that there's a law that protects me, but it doesn't give me control. or does it? I mean,
And I think the way regulations are written, they're written on a definition of personal data. And we've confined very much what personal data means, right? And it's certain data elements are personal data. And we are talking about regulations. When you're just talking about data protection regulations, they're already out of date, right? Even the GDPR from 2018, 7 years old, is already out of date in terms of the technology and what you can do with limited information to make assumptions about me today. And so I think that's getting ahead of us, right? When we start talking about the regulations too, like when we get to that part of the section, there is something about if we think about regulations being the floor, and being written in a way that they're more about the floor than the ceiling, then we can interpret or add more autonomy, more control within the individuals for how they engage with the systems and how the systems engage with them. But today they're written as though they're the ceiling.
Right. So that's something to aim for. And you said in your opening game as well, you said data reflects our relationships. Okay. And you talked about things that are inferred from our relationships and from our behavior. So we are these patterns. And sometimes we know that these patterns were coerced, right? There are things like dark patterns that are used in retail to, hey, this is the last one in the shop, buy it now. Or, hey, click here and then you can never get out. You end up in the Roach Motel that you can never unclick and unsubscribe from something. And I've got hundreds of things like that. It seemed like a great game at the time. I'm sucker for clickbait. So we have these things that are inferred and reflective on us. And that's not theoretical, that has real consequence, right? Yeah, I mean, and we've seen it in a case where, recently here, and it's an educational one because some of us are linked to education, with the UK, with the A-level results. An algorithm was run during COVID so the cohort that were due to do their A-levels in 2020, they were judged by an algorithm. Okay. And the model misjudged thousands and thousands and thousands of students. And I think it was as high as 79, nearly 80% of students did not get the grades they required to get into the universities. That affected their futures based on an assumption about a certain part of their performance, okay? And it affected their lives. That's not just a bad model from what you've just described to me. That's a misrepresentation of identity. Right? Because what you were saying there is that my identity is inferred from all of these things, and all of these things in my digital footprint and my landscape make me. And actually, the fact that I didn't then get attributed to that, I didn't get accredited, that actually is a misrepresentation of my identity, not just a bad model.
Agreed. I mean, I think that goes to like how the models need to be built, right? So it's that goes to kind of building those systems, our second part, right, which we can go into, right? Building the systems with some integrity, building the systems with the design in mind, not just again about the identity, but how are you going to make sure that the outcomes are as intended, right? We talk about that in privacy world for a long time. You hear it now in AI world about bias and fairness and transparency and the checks that are necessary to make sure that the system's output does not have those consequences.
And that is and I think you talk about they have real consequences on individuals, because this is an actual real impact on my identity. It's a real impact on potentially my privacy. And I just want to, if I can run an anecdote. I'm going to run an anecdote.
I love Geoff anecdotes.
So no, that's because this is directly related to that case study for the student case, because I was honored through Peter actually to run some lectures with an undergrad cohort, and I typically teach the postgrads. I'm more of a practical academic, so I'm used to small rooms with up to 30 people, not big rooms with 300. And I was nervous. I mean, I'm not going to lie. And I ran the first session and we did it for IR and it went really, really well. And it went really well. And, I got sort of, there was a bit of a Mexican wave coming out, out of it. And I thought that's quite cool. So the second one, I did a piece on cyber and crypto, put a Doge mask on, the dog Doge from the Dogecoin. It was before Elon went crazy, right? And everyone was, and I thought this is great. And third one, it was like playing Wembley. My ego started to lift. That every single one, it was like a show. Yeah, I'm learning and teaching, and these guys are. And the third one we talked about carbon footprints. We talked about digital decarbonization, some of the work that's happening at Loughborough. Dimmed the lights. Everyone kind of had their camera phones up with their lights. And so for the third one, I went for it. And I thought, of the fourth one, sorry, I thought this would be my encore, and I'll talk about privacy, what privacy means. And I've got to be honest, Jo. I went in. I had a don't tell Peter this. I had a slight. I had a little bit of a smoke machine and a bubble machine, because I thought I'd make this fun, right? And we talked about privacy, and I came running out. Hey, we're going to talk about privacy, and well, I actually met a bit of a palpable kind of disquiet. There was even I even heard a yawn, I think. And I was somewhat surprised, and my ego crashed, and there I was, shrouded in mist. And so I just thought, I have to talk to these guys about what this means. And what I got to from that community was, so much of this stuff doesn't matter, Geoff. We all run things on TikTok. We all run things on YouTube. We're all active on this. We're the commodity. We understand this, right? We understand we're the commodity. It's a transactional thing. We don't care about the rest of it. Then there was a conversation that then sort of alluded to, and actually, we have no control over this stuff anyway. Get real, old man. There's no such thing as online privacy. And we had this conversation. And then there was some chat about anonymity. And then I remember this one girl, and I remember her face, and I remember this, because she said it was such clarity and conviction. And she looked at me and she said, and she was impacted by this, by the way. And she said to me, I was impacted by this. I had everything I worked for, all my aspirations, all my dreams, everything about what I thought was me, stolen by an algorithm. And that's the word she used. And she said it with a mix of clarity, anger, and slight heartbreak as well. And I thought, well, I better turn the bubble machine off, because this feels like a poignant moment, right? First of all. And we had a conversation in the group that we opened up to talk about, what does this mean? What does privacy mean? And interestingly, what they did was we ended up constructing the psychological onion of writing about, of actually capturing what are the things that matter to you, what are the things that are core to you, that about you, that contextually you, and then, or what would you write in the close, and then expand out that you would monetize on the edge. And it was and that's where we got to. I didn't say, oh, you heard of psychological, this is where this was their work. And they started to talk about the tooling and the things that they would want around that. And they actually played back to me what's in the GDPR, because they said, well, there's stuff here that we want to take with us, that we want to make portable. There's stuff here that we want to have control of. We want to be able, there's stuff here that we want integrity for, that we want to update now and send out to millions of people. There's stuff here that we don't really care about, but if we can get a quick transaction and a buck for it, then fine, we'll do that. There are some things here that we want some anonymity for. And in that conversation, I started to then think about, and you'll know this, the digital philosopher from Cornell, Helen Niesenbaum, and I wrote it down because the words were, and I want to make sure I get them right, but she said, privacy is not about hiding, it's about contextual integrity. When systems strip context, they strip your identity. And that's what that's the anecdote that I got from that was, actually, if you strip this stuff back, you remove me. And it has actually consequences. It has actual real health consequences. And that's just something I just, that I got from this.
Yeah, I would add, though, that context part is evolutionary, right? Like,
okay,
the context of those students in the classroom that day was true that day and that moment. And the context may be different if you put that same class, if you had a reunion with them 5 years from now, and they're out in the world doing something different. Their perspectives and who they are and how they think of self could be different. And you need privacy, or at least the idea of privacy as the structure for integrity, to kind of be elastic that way, in terms of the control that people should have over that identity of self, right? It has to allow for me to say what was true 5 years ago when I was engaging with TikTok is different than what I want out of TikTok today, or who I want TikTok to share that information with, or what I want to be served. I don't want you to define me 5 years from now by the activities of my engagement 5 years prior, right? And so I think that's where like our technology is moving so quickly. Our regulations obviously can't move that quickly, but because technology is moving so fast and the amount of data that is being assumed about us is so massive, I think that's where it starts to get like that's where it's scary. So how do you add some structure around it? How do you add some boundaries around it? And what are those boundaries?
Yeah. Okay. And I was just thinking, and when you think of boundaries, because one of the things we got is anonymity. People often cite anonymity as a boundary. I'm just reflecting on the question here, or the quote here, that privacy is not about hiding. And it's interesting because when you do hide people, you get the whole Milgram experiment blown out. You get this kind of inhibitions go. You get this online de-inhibition syndrome.
Right.
And that's what we have in social media. That's what we have in all these it's what we have in a large context of the environments that people are experiencing online. In an element to protect privacy or privacy, sorry. God, it's infectious, Jo.
Wow, gotcha.
we end up with this situation where actually we go to we go to a point of stuff that is almost inhuman. Okay, that almost is I've removed my identity, so actually I can behave in a non-human way, and that actually is also I think part of the problem, that builds a system that isn't really caring for its community because there are no rules, right? You just do it. I mean, sometimes things can get taken off, but the harm's done. It's done. It's out there. So shall we move on?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. These are out of sync. I think I've accidentally promoted the first set of things.
Did we do the polling? Did we release polling question 1?
No, we didn't, because my slides are out of sync. Realize. So let me just. This is why I needed to practice multitasking, right? So let me just stop sharing for 1 minute. I do apologize.
Poll 1 relaunch. So you should all see poll 1 coming up on screen. What best describes your view of personal data? So if you could all just select one of those. And then when I've got a reasonable number of responses, we'll pop it on screen. I can see 5, 6, 7 of you responded. 8. Okay. Last few.
We will be deleting this information at some point after.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And we can't, I don't think we can identify you, but I don't know if Zoom can.
Yes. So we got 9 responded. Okay, last few seconds, then I shall end and share the results. So if I hit end and then share the results, you should all be able to see that on screen. Is that coming through, the results?
Yes, came through. So we have a social construct is the leader, and then a resource to protect. No one wants it to be a commodity to manage or thinks of it that way. And a part of your identity is 3rd place.
Cool.
All right.
Any
slides?
Yeah, I've lost half the slides, but we'll carry on.
Oh, no.
I don't quite know what's happened here.
Sorry.
So I'm going to ask a question and then I'll present some things. Okay. So the question I'm going to ask.
Geoff,
so
I could probably. I'm going to leave the poll up. Geoff, I can have a quick hunt for the slides in the background if that's helpful.
Okay. Yeah, if you can.
Yeah. Do you guys want to reflect on the poll for 30 seconds?
No, I have some slides. I've just got a chunk missing somehow out of the view I've got here.
Let me get those. Let me move the poll over there.
And then do we want to go to poll 2, or do you have a different question you wanted to ask?
I have a different question.
Okay.
I have a different question because I finished. I felt like we finished on talking about why if privacy is not about hiding, Okay.
Yeah.
And the question I wanted to ask is, what if privacy isn't about hiding, but maintaining the health of the system? Question. So what if privacy isn't about hiding, but maintaining the health of the system?
I think that's exactly what it is, right? I
Right.
think that's how you give it the integrity. I think the health of a system, like our own personal health, changes day to day, right? Is your immune system strong? A strong immune system will pick up on the things that it needs to have in its defenses, what it needs to attack, what has gone
Yeah.
wrong, right? And so a strong, healthy system has a strong immunity. But you also need to pick up on when the immune system is failing, right? And so do you need to give it a little boost of vitamin C or zinc or something along those lines? And that boost to me would be your product has evolved. The way
Yeah.
people are engaging with it has evolved, or their expectations have evolved. And so you need to evolve the product to meet those expectations, but you need to have a system or an oversight or the governance part of it that can pick up on that, right? There's got to be something that you're accountable to. At least that's for me. I mean,
Right.
it's coming from my legal background, right? The accountability aspect in society, I think, helps to drive that kind of check.
Okay. So if I hear what you're saying, you're saying it's not about secrecy, it's about a scaffolding, right? So it's not about the fence to protect the stuff. It's actually about the structure and the skeletal things that we
Right.
build from, right?
Yeah.
That stops the
Scaffolding
system collapsing.
is a great metaphor, right? Because the scaffolding, if you think about it in the construction term, it's that tool that is used to kind of protect the structure, protect the people inside, protect who's walking underneath, right? And it allows what's happening behind the scenes to continue to happen, right? And to
Okay.
continue to evolve and to continue to
Okay.
expand, grow, whatever's happening in the construction sense, right? And so,
Yeah.
I think what I hate about fence is the same thing that I hate about speed bumps, roadblocks, brick walls, in terms of thinking about privacy as like that makes it seem much more static
Yeah.
than what is happening on the other side.
Okay. So this is a systematic approach that enables the sharing of stuff, right? So we get to some commonality around this is a structure that we can build that actually I can be who I want to be online, right? And I can start to actually start to have a space where I can express myself, right? So healthy systems, they don't run surveillance without context. Okay, so going back to the contextual, they give individuals a space to feel free without fear. And when we talk about privacy breaches, particularly, I mean, we tend to talk about exposure. So we sort of look at it from what data was exposed, what's been exposed here. But actually, what's being exposed is a failure of that system. Not just my data, not just to me. It's actually a failure of whatever it was that you were seeking to do to protect, and what you were protecting, and what the purpose was for that protection. I mean, there are numerous case studies and examples of that. I mean, I don't know if you can think of any. When I go on.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say there was one we talked about during the pandemic, and I don't know if anybody wants to go back to pandemic days, talking about the pandemic again. But if you think about two fierce competitors, Apple and Google, at the start of the pandemic, they came together and they developed a decentralized approach to contact tracing. And if you think about just one, that they were two fierce competitors coming together to do something that had nothing to do with their products, that had nothing to do with them making money, but had everything to do with serving society in a way that was much more efficient and effective. That actual contract tracing approach performed better because they took a decentralized approach. If you imagine they had done it differently, that a Google phone and an Apple phone would have had a different approach to this, it wouldn't have been as helpful to the healthcare industry, right? And to governments. And so it was a privacy first approach that they took. Apple has always led with being a privacy first product. Google, I don't know if that's true or not. Don't kill me on YouTube. But they used an anonymous rotating identifier, right? That was the way that they operated this decentralized contract tracing approach. And so they took a systems first approach, and a not privacy hiding necessarily approach, but a more like serving society and serving a more scalable and effective model, like a wiser model.
And it was successful, right?
And it was successful.
It was adopted, and it was adopted. And I mean, and some of that might have been the circumstance of actually people wanting to do the right thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But some of it will have been about trust.
Right.
And you know, and as you say, serving. So I was being served by this rather than rather than me serving it. And that makes me ask the question about flipping the model. And I'm glad you talked about decentralization. And I would have had some slides on this, which I'll send to you all later. But basically,
that was like your segue to
yeah, I had my picture, but I have some pictures that we'll go back to in a minute just to kind of bring some of this to life.
Yeah.
But the centralized model says, in order for me to get access to my data, let's say, and all of the stuff about me and my identity, I have to prove who I am, right, to a bunch of online platform providers. And in order to do that, I need to prove, first of all, that I'm human. So I have to talk to something to make sure it's not a bot, and try and read some codes and look at some pictures that I can never quite see because my eyesight's not quite there. I mean, go through that pain, and then have to prove who I am to that system. Probably remember, I don't know, 100 different passwords that I've all written down, right? Or I'm saving on my phone, okay? Just to access me. What are they protecting there? They're not protecting me. That system's protecting them. It's protecting their, I'm close to quoting Chomsky, but it's protecting their property, right? That's what that's for. If you flip the model, right? So if we flip the model, instead of there's these platforms and people are at it, so actually in the center of that, there's me, okay? And it's sovereign to me. So the ownership isn't them. You know, it isn't me giving them an asset to own and protect. It's actually the ownership's me. So it's my sovereignty now, not their sovereignty. And actually the data is somehow I can then say, well, this is what's core to me, and you can have some bits of it. But the model's flipped around me in a very decentralized way. And some of what I'm interested in, and if we go back a few, Jonathan, actually, if we go back to slide 7, this is an example kind of use case. But keep going back. Yeah, this one. So go to this one here. So in this case here, this is built from a self-sovereign ID platform. This has kindly been shared by Neoki, who are a company I've been working with, and it's aimed at the travel industry. So what a self-sovereign identity, how that works is you have kind of like a triangular of 3 parties, really. You have the holder, i.e. me, with my phone. You have an issuer and you have a verifier. I want to get something from the issuer, and I need the verifier to actually then prove that that's correct. How that works is an exchange of information that's stored on chain. So it's all decentralized. Much of it's on edge. Much of it's stored in a data console that I access. Okay, that belongs to me. So it's all the things about me. And in this case, it's, you know, my digital passports or whatever that, you know, I want to use, and all the things that I want to use to travel. A cryptographic message is sent between those parties. So there's like a key exchange that just proves those things. And that then means, as a traveler, and this was built as part of the IATA's proof of concept. So if you haven't seen it already, I'd encourage you all, if you're interested to look at kind of the future of a digital identity, is to look at IATA's proof of concept. It ran about 2 years ago, but it's contactless travel, and it's the mechanism for, you know, being able to board flights and being able to kind of get through all of the challenges that travelers face, you know, in the process, because carriers are more interested in your luggage than they are you. They have to take some stuff about you, and they have to take your ID to prove that you are who you say you are. And they also have to then give that, you know, to a government agency. They don't really want to hold that. You know, they are forced to hold lots of information. And some of this was initiated from an exposure from British Airways systems that were hacked back in 2018. And BA looked at it and went, why are we taking the liability for this? And in the self-sovereign mechanism, what I can then do is I biometrically open my phone, and a whole load of things I can share. And I can share my identity documentation, so I can actually share sort of some verifiable credentials that prove who I am. But I can also share other things. And this is a consensual model. So I can consent, delegate. I can actually dictate what I share, who with, and for how long. And in the case of this, the airline only needs to know that you are who you are. They need it for that one transaction, for that flight done. They don't need to know that again. But they might want some other information, about where else I'm traveling. And I can set those preferences. So I'm actually, to your point that you said, Jo, I'm now in control. So they can actually start to build that framework around where you're at. Okay. So, and if you just go to the net, and it gives an opportunity for because everyone talks about personalization, right? We're on this journey. We hear, if we hear about the kind of the sort of online stuff, we all clicked onto these systems initially because it was convenient and it was cheaper, then we wanted it secure. And now actually we want this kind of personalization that runs me. But these incentives are allowed to my travel. So this just starts to drive this concept of things being connected to me as I travel. I can get updates if, my plane's late. I can auto send an update to my taxi company or to my Uncle Marge, who's at the airport, to pick me up. I can get forward information about what's happening with the flight. That information can be shared. I can actually contact a hotelier directly and actually get some other stuff done. And I can do that in a very seamless way, very autonomous way. That's just something I wanted to share, because I think this is an integral structure of me being able to share who I am and what I am in a system that needs data to flow, and that I'm not hidden. I'm just hidden to the bits I don't want to have to deal with today. It manages my intent. It's not a system of attention, just, there to actually monetize me. It's there for me to actually gain service and context and fulfillment. That's what I'm kind of interested in being about. And I'm interested to know, what your thoughts on kind of where that could go.
Yeah, this is definitely in the direction of giving the user, the individual, control. But you've shared this concept with me. I obviously love the concept. I just don't know what would be needed. What are the precursors needed for this to actually be operational? Well,
it's happening. So the precursors are that you need some spark of regulation. So these systems exist. I've promoted Gnocchi. There are systems in the UK. So there's Self, with an entrepreneur called Dan Sutherland.
I guess
So I think the tech's there.
Yeah. So the tech is there. For it to actually be more intuitive, what we are doing,
right.
For it to be this platform here, that platform there, a little bit of representation in one industry, no representation in another. Then you're still just me, Jo, will still experience, I'm going to sign up for this wherever I can get it, but then I'm still going to have 10 passwords in 20 other places, and always resetting my password because the passkey didn't work today, kind of thing.
Right.
So that tomorrow, what will it take to make this operational, that there's that tomorrow of I am at the center of my universe for my identity, and I am getting to choose for shopping, and even within shopping, for retail versus travel versus,
and
luxury, for anything in my life. How do I get there for everything?
I think it'll be a starting point of this will get some form of adoption. So it'll get brought into life. It exists. There are national national identifiers are
That's
always
quite. If you were going to talk
about. That can be quite controversial, because actually, particularly, given European history, what happened when there was national, identity cards and all of the horrors that came from that.
Right.
But that is exactly what's happening. The EU are building this. There's IDAS 2 as a piece of regulation, which quite loftily they say will operationalize GDPR. I'm not certain, because I have some reservations around government registers and phone home things, but this stuff is starting to happen. It'll come into place there, so there'll be certain institutions that will have to accept them. Travel potentially being one, actually. If I start to travel, the carriers will start to have to accept my digital ID and build services for that. There are, and this is actually central to the DUA bill in the UK as well. There's an awful lot of conversation and context around what digital identity brings in the context of smart data, of being able to give individuals the opportunity to link that. It also exists in Bhutan. Bhutan are, as an experiment, and interesting, because a Buddhist country that has no concept of self, right? But they have a national ID scheme that they run, and everyone has a wallet, and every visitor gets given one as well. And you manage everything through that. And it's off mainstream tech, right? So it enables the peer-to-peer kind of, so it builds an ecosystem. So there's a great experiment in what's happens there. And you'll start to see these things. I mean, there are kind of add-ons to this, as I said, on edge kind of data wallets. And Brazil, I think, are just in the process of piloting, citizen data wallets to allow citizens to monetize. There's a lot to happen in that space. I mean, you're right. Literacy. I mean, literacy would be a key thing around, are people literate enough to really understand this stuff?
Right.
So there's an education that has to happen, but this will start to drip feed. And I think as we start to see the evolution of kind of agents, okay, and personal agents, so you can run an AI that starts to learn off the data that I'm, that about me, so it starts to actually cement that identity. I think that's potentially a scalable system integrity, because privacy is about sharing. Ultimately, if I share more about myself, right, we're going to get potentially a more sustainable ecosystem. So that's kind of my view. That's what I think.
I know we have another poll, but before we get to that poll and before we get to the next section, which is governance focused, there was one question that we had talked about, kind of just reflecting on, and I don't know if it's more, we could ask the audience to reflect on this and tell us what you think, and we'll talk about it in part two. But given everything that we've talked about, given what you just showed us from SSI, and self-sovereign, where have you felt most seen or most exposed by a system that you use regularly?
Wow.
And it's both ways on purpose, right? So seen could be exposed, obviously doesn't feel as good.
Well, I tend to turn things off, right? I tend to, because I've worked in the industry, so I start to see all this stuff. So I was an early adopter of putting all my online traffic through something that didn't track me. So I had Ghost. I mean, you'll know what Ghost is, but Ghost Tree was a product that measured kind of all of the trackers and pixels and things that were dropped on you when you were on a site. And to Ghost Tree, there's all these, and it got encompassed into the DuckDuckGo product. And so I was a very early adopter of DuckDuckGo, and because I did not want to be seen, exposed in that actually this is just the state. And partly it was the attrition of getting stuff, constantly sent to me I didn't want to know about. So I turned off that exposure. The other place I think is actually when I'm proving my identity to do things that aren't banking. I think the banking systems are pretty integral. Okay, but when I'm trying to do things with a retail, with an online shopping, or I'm a member of a music community and I have to do some ID stuff, I feel really exposed there because there's lots of friction in the process. So I have to remember, oh, damn, I use this site once a month and I've got to go and remember stuff that I can't remember. And I always feel exposed in that moment that someone else could layer in, that there's an opportunity in every gap and every piece of friction for someone else to come in and be imposed, be an imposter of me. That's where there's a gap. And that's the thing that always bothers me. Yeah, and the fact that, as I've just said, anyone that picks up my phone and can break the biometric into there, it gets the list of my passwords because I can't remember them. I'm a human. I'm not a machine. I'm not designed to remember machine-driven passwords, acceptable passwords, or I just use the same two like everyone else. And I don't want to do that either. So that's where I feel exposed. In that integrity. Okay.
Completely agree.
So surveillance and logging in.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Do we want to launch poll 2?
Yeah, if we could. Thanks, John. I failed the multitasking. I don't know what happened. I've deleted half the slides somehow in presenting them. I don't quite know. But anyway.
Don't worry. Right, so you guys should be able to see poll 2 up. So please, everybody choose one of the options. So what's the most important quality in a future governance system? And after this, Geoff, we can dive back up. I've downloaded
into the slides. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
So 5 out of 12 responded. 6, 7, 8, 9. Any more responses? Okay, going, gone. Right, share results. You should be able to see the results on screen.
Yeah, it's kind of close. Accountability is in the lead by 33%, and everything else is tied. Transparency, adaptability, inclusivity. The only one that's got a 0 is empathy. Very interesting.
Talk about caring systems.
Yeah, exactly.
F that. I'm sorry. Oops.
Just realistic expectations.
Right, so care is scratched.
Yeah, I always forget that one.
Scratch that. Got it. Okay, so we can I think there's a slide on governance, and I think we're going to kick off this last part of our part 1 of the conversation.
Dive to the slides.
And just kind of lay the foundation for what we're going to stretch here on the thinking around governance too.
Yeah.
So when we think about governance, we're trying to expand the thinking around governance. So again, this is kind of what we were talking about on the floor versus the ceiling. And so if we try to stretch the thinking around what we think about governance today, or at least when people see me walk in the room, they think about a rule book, or they think about a guardrail. And what we're trying to have governance be thought of as is some of these kind of components here. So the adaptability and flexibility, the transparency and intelligibility, human-centric context and integrity, what we've talked about here. And so it's not the rule book, it's a dynamic ecosystem. It's got to be flexible and adaptable to the needs of your organization, to the needs of the system, to the needs of consumers, employees, whoever it is that you're, with. And it's not just about guardrails. It's really about enabling trust and innovation, right? So trust, you want your customers and your employees to maintain that trust with you and how they engage with you. But me, coming from a corporate context, I also want to encourage innovation, foster innovation, find a way to make sure that we can be as innovative as possible. And some of that innovation, I always like to challenge our tech people. Some of that innovation is actually making sure that you're doing it in a way that is human-centric, is thinking about the consumer, isn't just about the product itself, without thinking about the experience and thinking about what end. And so as a privacy leader, I've obviously through the years have seen how compliance can flatten all of that nuance. From my earliest days, compliance was a checkbox exercise. It was the exercise of, what does the regulation say? What does our policy say? Are we meeting those expectations? And literally on pieces of paper, like boxes that you were checking. I've built some of those checkbox processes. I think some of our first PIAs, our privacy impact assessments, were checkboxes to try to just get it done. I think we can no longer operate in a field like that, not where technology is today, not where data is today, not where consumer expectations are today. So I think I'd like to see more governance shift from being all of that kind of very boxed approach to being more about a conversation, more about stewardship. And so how do we get there in the conversation in order to support what we are talking about when we're talking about building systems of integrity and thinking about the identity and self? And so, Geoff,
Yeah.
You have opened my mind up. This is why I'm here today. You've opened my mind up about what cybernetics is, what it means, and
Right.
you've talked about it as a model for governance, systems that sense and they learn and they course correct, which is
Right.
the adaptability aspect of what we're talking about. Can you talk about how that changes the role for regulators, lawyers, technologists, people who are supposed to be the stewards for helping companies engage appropriately?
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, so as you've just described, most systems, most regulatory systems are almost built like the machines. They're almost built in that binary, or that's how they're perceived. That's how they're operated. So they become rule-based, okay, and reactive. So we see this, and to the frustrations of that cohort back in 2021 about, undergrads who said, who cares, I just have to tick all these boxes and no one cares, right? That's what they were alluding to. It's just a reactive thing that actually just sullies their transactional experience. And the difficulty is today's technological systems and the systems of interaction digitally and online are they are incredibly dynamic and becoming more so. And it's ironic, really, because I remember when we saw GDPR 10 years ago, when we saw the first draft, we thought, they're getting ahead. They're repairing all of the things that were wrong with the previous directive into a regulation to make it. And it still hasn't quite got there. And even now they're starting to unpick and, trying to revisit as policymakers how to make it apply. So governance has to evolve into something much more cybernetic that enables systems to be able to monitor and course correct. That can't just, and that doesn't necessarily just need to be an instrumental thing, by the way. That can be a kind of mediation. That can involve humans in that process too. I mean, it has to. And if we think about RegTech, I mean, we've both worked on RegTech projects. It doesn't just automate compliance. It needs to actually surface some ethical tensions, reveal blind spots, and have a governance capability that helps us to ask better questions rather than, this doesn't look like it passes, boom, or this has passed. It needs to actually start to get us to think about regulation in a way that we ask questions. And with that in mind, and I wouldn't mind just sharing something as some models that I'm quite interested in. And there's one that's a trust over IP. I don't know if anyone's come across the team of trust over IP. If you just move to the next slide. Sorry, thanks, Jonathan. So this is the trust over IP model. And what the creators of trust over IP had was a vision to build a layer of trust on the internet. So they understand the architecture of the internet and the structures, and they wanted to create a trusted layer. And the way they've done that is you can see here, I mean, this is built up over time, but this is just the complete model. And what you have here is a trust layers of or layers of specific capabilities. So you can see we've got layer one there, which is talking about kind of specific support items. So that might just be kind of like a verifiable database or a verifiable register. You've got a trust layer that talks about the technology that does to the end-to-end, so the end-to-end security. There's a trust layer around some of the artifacts. So it would have things like the credential exchange in the identification process. And there is also a layer there that you just have the ID and the wallets and the kind of application layer that interacts with the people. And at each layer of each of those specific capabilities, inside each layer, there is actually a governance structure. So there will be some standards or governance that actually some protocols that determine how that credential exchange happens, or something that explains, that details the format requirements for the registries, for example. And that's actually built in there within the system. So the whole system becomes technologically and governance actually intertwined. And the governance is run in a way that the Cybernetics you would expect to see. It is a feedback loop. Okay, so it runs in a continuous define, run, and then back to undefine, redefine kind of loop. So it's continually learning, and there are humans in that part of the process. And that's the span of control. That's the span for the trust over IP. That's the piece that they are interested in. Where this gets interesting is how it then deals with each of the ecosystems. Okay, so you can have multiple ecosystems that actually will take learning from this. So they will actually, each ecosystem will have their own specific concerns, they'll have their own interests. Those interests are defined by whatever their purpose is, okay? And they may make use of other systems, and what they will do is take part of this governance, interact with another ecosystem, take some learning, and then feed that back. So there's an entire connectivity. And if you just flick to the next slide, but what this seeks to build is something that's interconnected, interoperable, but also a learning ecosystems that actually can start to be trusted. And this is how trust over IP see the deployment, Jo, to your point around decentralization. So this is how we will get these decentralized connects that start to revolve around what I might be, by this connection of ecosystems that start to change the environment. It starts to remove the badlands and start to create some more fertile soils. So this is an idea that I've seen that I'm quite excited about, and seeing how it might progress. I mean, I don't know what you think. I mean, I'm quite technically minded, but I mean, in explaining that, is that something that you think from a legal perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think both the hard part on the legal perspective is this is going to be hard for lawyers to understand.
Right. Okay.
But
they just need to understand one layer of the artifact, because they're going to just build the legal elements to it. So
I think, but I think we have to get better about this. Like my community of lawyers has to get better about this, and it's not true of all lawyers. The more technical minded can get this, but I think it gives an assurance, especially what you were showing on trust. Trust over IP and that model. I mean, it gives that kind of flexibility in how it reacts and responds, and that adaptability in how it reacts and responds. That is exactly where we need to be headed.
Right. And just from a legal perspective, if I might just say, because if I can give an example, I mean, GDPR right now, I mean, privacy regulations are dependent on kind of all the intermediary behaviors. Yes, so they're protecting me from intermediaries and kind of setting requirements for those. I think this model negates that, because I think it says we're designing for consent here, we're designing for learning, and we're designing for a kind of a feedback system where we can start to redefine and start to do things in a much more adaptive way. I actually think it negates some of that legality. I think it starts to push the legality to the stuff that's actually great.
Honestly, that should be the future. And I think some of the regulations are written in such a way to try to protect, but in such a prescriptive way. GDPR, I don't think, is exactly this, but several other regulations since GDPR have been written in such a prescriptive, impractical way that it is impossible to meet the objectives, or what you think are the objectives as defined in the regulation, still delight or excite a customer, still be innovative or innovative, and meet everybody's expectations. They're creating, since you have the word ecosystems on the page, they're creating ecosystems that cannot be sustained, right?
Yeah.
The regulations are written today. Ideally, you create regulations that are still more principles and objectives based. Again, that's why I say floor and not ceiling, and everything in between should be what we create to meet the expectations of consumers and still protect them and their information in the way that they individually choose.
Okay. The other thing I was going to add, because I understand what you're saying. So what you're saying is that regulators will try to regulate what they understand. Okay. And so there's some contextual literacy that needs to happen, because we're gonna need to finish this thing because I'm just looking at time. But there is a role for ontology in this. And I think most of the people in the room here will probably understand that there is a role for an ontology that binds some of the context around this. So privacy is an ontology. I don't know many privacy lawyers that would actually talk of it in that way, because we end up being silos. We end up, there are these silos even of operations around the enterprise. So there's people in the ethics space, there's people that do the sort of visualization, and then there's the architectural elements of people that handle data that think more ontologically, and where we can start to build these ecosystems of regulation, I think is a melding of mathematical ontology from the machine and what is the moral ontology. I think we need absolutely to get a legal community involved in that. Right now, we're not there because we tend to have conversations around the technicality of law, applying it in a system that we understood historically, and not a system that's coming from. So this is like the evolution of hunting, right? I hunted with a spear. The ethics of that was different to suddenly I've got a crossbow. There's a different ethical and moral understanding of how I hunt with that, or how I use that as a tool or as a weapon, right? And I think, I think that's something that we need to get constructed to enable, that kind of adaptive governance.
I think the time is now. I think that's where regulation maybe comes in, right? Because again, I think government and regulation can help define the accountability of it all, can provide the kind of minimum expectations of it all. Where it tries to get too defined, too prescriptive, again, that's where it's going to fail. If you think about where technology is today and where it was just 2 years ago and where we know it's going to be in 6 months from now, the pace of technology is way too fast. I think this is the part where we just need to come together, technologists, government, academia, right? We have to come together to create a better ecosystem for being more protective while being able to be more adaptable.
Yeah. And I'm just going to add, this stuff's happening. Okay. Yeah. So to the operation of a system currently, that does exactly what you just said, because you just said, yeah, we need to get the law there. But if we baseline our governance on the criminality, which is what we're saying when we need to bring the law in, then we're kind of in the wrong philosophy, I think. And this stuff's happening. So I think for me, if I can start to see and understand the system, I can see things that are learning and that are taking that accounts, and that I have some explainability to me, then that's something I probably am going to start to trust more, I think, if it gives me the element of all of that other stuff I can control, that it protects my identity and my soul.
Jo and Geoff, just to let you know, we've got plenty of questions building up on chat.
I think we're
see
done.
that. Yep.
We're done.
I think we're going to give everyone a break, but we have some questions to leave you with before you break when we come back for the next part.
Yeah, sure. Okay, we have one last question in the poll. Fortunately, I don't think it asks the question of what do you think of Geoff's slide presentation capability, which is I am really, I'm really, thank God for, thank you. I'm always learning from you, Jo, right? But we'd be very interested to understand which part of that presentation you kind of liked. I mean, if you didn't like any of it and you leave now, we won't be offended either. That's fine, but we would love to understand that. That would be great. How long do we want to take for break? I'll ask the chair, because we were building in a 15-minute break, Peter, but we can make it 10. I don't.
Yeah,
5 minutes.
If that suits you. That suits you. Lots to discuss. I mean, really.
Yeah. So if we do 5 minutes, then I'm gonna suggest something different than what we had planned. I'm just gonna reveal what was happening backstage before, which is we were gonna read all the questions and try to answer ahead of time. But maybe we'll just read through. We'll give everybody a 5-minute quick bio, water break.
Yeah, but
and then we'll go live through the discussion. Feel free to ask what you asked before. You can be flexible and adaptable and human-centric. All right, so we'll come back. Should we say one? Oh, let's finish out the poll first. Okay, so Governance Reimagined is the winner. And then we have a tie again for Data and Identity, Privacy as a System of Health, and all of the above.
Technically everyone's a winner because there's 2 for all of above as well.
The winner. So. Thank God, none of the above. And if you thought you were just really nice and didn't answer, it's going to be my guess. Okay, so should we say 1:18? Come back?
Yeah, if we come back at 6:18 our time.
Yeah. 6:18. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. See you all in 5 minutes.
That's like that polite music to tell you to stop your speech during at least the American awards or do that. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's like a really aggressive bell sound.
Oh, yeah, okay. Amazing. All right, everybody's back. I guess we can get started. I think we had some prompts though, but I don't know if we need them.
I don't think we do. I think we can just go through these
Go
questions.
straight to the questions, which I didn't get a chance to look at.
I think we can kind of go to this and then, I think.
Yeah, makes sense.
So we have a question from, I don't know if Vanilla's here, in relation to what happens if you periodically feed false data into the data flow. I lie about my birthday, my place of birth often.
I do that. I saw Vanilla at some point you said that you lie about your birthday, which I have been doing since I have control over being able to do that. So and it's the same lie though. So I don't know now if that's because I have to try to remember it. So it's the same lie every time. So I can remember
Yeah,
it.
remembering it's a problem because my lies are extraordinarily creative and I give myself many more years than I've actually existed in. Because I'm waiting to see what will happen. You know, I get Facebook greetings when I'm 104, and nobody seems to have realized that this is not actually accurate.
It's amazing.
It is pretty bizarre, isn't it? Also, I mean, I was keen to say I came from the planet Tharg at one time, and it was Throgmoro land in New Zealand or something. So I stuck with that. Again, I've never been.
Nothing's ever validated it. So there's been no validation.
I've never
because
collaborated in any way.
Because the purpose of that is not to identify you, is it? That system, it's just literally to, hey, log on and start feeding us stuff, right? I think. I mean, that's where I look at, particularly. I mean, we look at Meta as a case in point. I mean, the age, and they have real issues with trying to identify on age restrictions because, I mean, I can't remember, was it 16 or something? All my kids had Facebook accounts when they were 13 because it was just something that they all wanted. Obviously, I was a friend of theirs because I wanted to, because surveillance isn't always bad, right? Surveillance is okay if it's in there to protect them and kind of from a good perspective. But all we identified was they changed the language. So they'd start talking to each other and stuff we didn't understand. So they'd use code words and, and all of this. So, so it's interesting. But yeah, they were all logged into it when they were 13, 14. And it's a challenge now that Meta face. There are things around that are now starting to happen in the identification space in relation to identifying children. But it's a tricky thing because you want to put children into identity registers. Yeah, maybe you can authenticate some of those things, but am I ready for my kid to be in a government ID rich? I'm not sure yet. I don't know if I trust the government enough. So it's a really good question to theorize around what's the best way to deal with that. And the concept of self-sovereignty is that you can use different identifiers if you want to. You don't always have to use the official thing. You can use a credential that you might have. So it might be, I can prove I'm over 18 or over a certain age, and here's a credential I have that might be a driver license, might be a graduation certificate or something. Yeah, that doesn't have to give you the specifics, just I'm in a range of maturity, I guess. So that's kind of some of the conceptualization. But it's a good question.
Well, one of the theses that began the debate I had with my father about this was that to tell the truth to authority meant complying with them.
Right.
So at what point do we decide that we're not complicit? We don't like this. I'm not going to tell you anything. Or at least if I do, I'm going to lie through my teeth. Or I'm just going to jiggle with the truth. I'm going to chuck in a bit of anarchy here and see what happens.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's an element of some of that gets removed. I mean, you can pick and choose some of those things, but there will be cases that you can't. I mean, you're quite right. And we've got a history of this in our country, right? We're not subjects anymore. Okay. And we are, that level of kind of like, we have an understanding, but there's not a full trust, and I mean, it's different. So, I mean, I use Bhutan as an example. It's probably the worst example because whilst they don't have context of self, all of the data is that, you know, they trust their king. So all of the data kind of belongs to the king in a way. That's how they viewed it when I was chatting to that. And it's an interesting concept. It's like, because they don't feel the concept of lying is something that's necessary. They just kind of have a very much less cynical approach, I think, to organizations that have been in our way subjected to something that's probably not worked the way we have in our doctrine. So
I suppose the baseline is what we think this stuff is being used for and by whom.
Exactly.
Yeah, and these are such big questions and so variable and so context driven that it's impossible to be, well, you tell me.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the key things, I mean, reflecting back on the identity things that we are moving for is to ensure that there is no phone home, so that when I use my digital identity, there's not a phone home directly back to that. I've used it for the purpose that they might need to know I've entered the country or left the country. That's fine. They might need to know because I'm claiming for something official, but they don't need to know that I've used it to do something else, you know, to get access to a music studio or anything. They don't need that. So there's no phone home. We turn the phone home off. It's literally, I interject and I'm part of a transaction that legally they have a reason to know, but they don't, you know, but where they don't, there's no connection, because that is that kind of surveillance is something that is troubling, you know, as we move to, you know, regimes that are becoming slightly more authoritarian in their makeups.
And we don't know what's going to happen to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, who knows, to 10 years time, good Lord. I think.
Yeah, but you said legally needs to know, and I think some of it too is us giving up a little bit of our normal comfort for safety too. And so like the Apple Google example, because we trusted it, but there's a little bit of trust I think that we sometimes give to government for making sure that we're safe. And so we give a little bit more data and information for those purposes than we would normally have ever done. I think some have had to pay the penalties of giving maybe too much information in because you thought you were giving it for one purpose and it may be being used for another. But I do think it's not just about we kind of let our governments get away with a little bit more, even if it's not regulated per se, or we let other comforts be put aside for a regulation that supersedes all others under the guise of safety. It's what you were talking about before too, with some of the national IDs, and like I get worried as well because it could be used for wrong in the wrong hands. Just finished reading a book that I should have read a long time ago when it was released on the beginnings of facial recognition, and that's just another place where it was started. There was ideas and concepts for how it would be used for good from a protective perspective, right? So you could identify the bad guy that's on the street, so you can find the bad guy that's on the street. But the way that it was used, to those exact same technology providers were using it to prevent a mom from walking into Madison Square Garden because she worked for a law firm that was suing Madison Square Garden, as an example, is like the extreme other end of using that exact same technology for another purpose, right? So I just wanted to stretch the thinking there. It's not just what's regulated or what's allowed, or
Absolutely. So we have some more questions. Margaret, I know you've asked a couple of questions on here in relation to what we're trying to protect. And also you raised some issues around individualism. Do you want to
what is an individual? I mean, you seem to reduce it to the data. And I'm sort of going, hang on, right, just let's slow down. I mean, I also want to sort of say that you're assuming it's always the government who's the nefarious actor. I mean, when we know that even if you're not a Facebook member, they will track all your all your keyboard strokes. I mean, if you're on TikTok, it's everything. You're just identifiable patterns now because the data things are so huge, this notion of you being an individual is kind of ephemeral, because you're not as unique as you thought you were, in that sense, in terms of those patterns. But you are not the sum of those patterns. These are your interaction patterns. These are your, you are much, much more than that. And I think to conflate the two things is very, very dangerous.
100% agree. I think we might have missed the mark if we weren't making that clear at the beginning. I think that's what we were trying to challenge, is that today it seems like that is an assumption, is that you are the reflection of those patterns, and we have lost the concept of self as an individual, as a human, right?
It's uniqueness, your uniqueness.
Your
we've
uniqueness,
lost-
exactly,
Yes.
exactly.
Your personhood.
Yes.
It's become your performance, and your exteriority has been misunderstood for your personhood.
Agree. I wonder though, like if you bring up Vanilla's ideas too, like if you're pretending to be somebody else, depending on each interaction,
Then it's theatre,
or each
then it's masking,
platform,
and
then it's theater too.
Yeah,
Right, exactly.
it is theatre. You're using a device, a theatrical device within which to engage in a certain context,
Yes.
and assuming certain relations in those contexts.
Right.
You see, so you're kind of, it's the whole old tribal masking thing, where you take on a character, and we're very, very ancient creatures in that sense, psychologically.
True.
We just have a new medium in which we're actually playing out these old anthropological rituals, if you like, symbols.
Absolutely.
So
I love thinking about it as theater or as our tribal masks. I'm also thinking about, in my youth, my friends have different aliases.
Exactly. That's right. And so the question then becomes, what do I want control of?
Right.
What am I trying to really protect, or what, where does the control function need to lie? What is it that and I love that relationship thing, because that's what I really want control over.
Yeah.
Is that, because that's the link for the different environments and so on, right?
Absolutely. And we never map that out. When we build systems, I never see that context of the map of all of those things.
Yeah.
I mean, I see maps of assets, maps of, system, but I never see that contextually mapped. And I think that's something that we need to get to in design. So we actually map to the human and their consent and their intent. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the point we're trying to make is these identities that we are measured from online are contextualist, because they're not real, and yet they have such a deterministic impact on everything we try to do, and our health and various other things. So that's the point. And to the point, actually, I read a really great article on Medium today by a friend of mine. His name's Tony Fish, and Tony writes a blog of a CDO, I think it's called. And he actually has written, and I can send it to this community. He actually posed a really good question: is what happens when the AI lies better than you?
Yes, which it does.
What happens when the maths is lying better than you and your moralistic intention, and you have an agent? We're busy dishing out agents.
Confabulation.
What happens when it's doing that better? And suddenly you're trapped by your own agent. You're just replicating what we have now, where I'm trapped using Google's collaborative tools because I just don't know what else to do. All of the systems that we've started to inject it's amorphous in that. It's really difficult to come off of that and use something else and go back to paper. It's
a reality disjunction, really, in the sense you forced me to inhabit this fantasy world that you've created and constructed, and I'm now just a participant, a kind of player in, no longer a person in. And it's with agency. I'm now what's the word? Coerced into this.
You're coerced, and it is a coercive. And we're starting to see psychological journals that talk about artificial intimacy as well. I mean, I'm in a band, and our singer, bless him, he's going through a big life change, and he is telling me, "Oh yeah, I'm having this conversation with GPT, and it tells me that he's confiding in a machine." And I'm sitting there thinking, that's just not right. That's just not healthy. But he loves the answers he gets.
Of course. And that's because our brains work the way they do, right? I mean, we're patterned on our past and on our. It's just we are. This is the problem with our brains. It is the fact that we are neuroplastic. We're only as good as the last set of data that we've Actually, you know, this is the very big problem with us as humans.
Yeah,
Wonderful, but really dangerous.
absolutely.
Unless we ground ourselves in the reality of being in this referential frame, in this contextual ground of being, they call it, a ground of hell, what's the word? And I think that this is this grounding problem is really, really important. It's got to be grounded in our physical experiences, not just our online fantasies.
Absolutely. And we will end up with potentially with streams of digital twins that will start to replicate what we want to do from a health perspective. And how do I control that? And how do I ethically manage that as well? That I don't actually make the slave, make a slave of my twin. It's actually something I use digitally that helps to this.
And then you have the real problem with distortions. I mean, I had blood tests done today, and I look at what the GPs ordered, and I think she didn't ask 500 questions she should have asked, which would have meant she would have asked different tests. Yeah. So this is the problem with the distortions, right? Yeah,
absolutely. And these are the things that we need, that actually, and why I raised the TOIP, because trust over IP are one of the mechanisms that are starting to build this stuff, is actually involvement in there, because it starts to force some of the special interest groups. And there are ontologies built that have a role within all of those things as well. And we still haven't got that bit right. Moral ontology is really difficult.
Very, very hard.
Really difficult to establish. Peter, you had a question, I think. Did you raise something in here? Online world. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, to be honest, I've got so many. This is so interesting and so important. But I'm just going to contain myself a bit.
Okay.
But make maybe two observations. First of all, it's quite nice to think anthropologically, as Margaret was taking us there, and you sort of say, well, it's the tribal mask. But the mask, just following just what's been said, the mask now talks back. And it talks back with distortions. And each time we put on the tribal mask, we have a new kind of altered conversation. So I think that's quite an interesting kind of just set of thoughts, to have a little bit of sci-fi, except it's not sci-fi to hold there. But the reason why I cited Ketman, I mean, Czesław Miłosz's work influenced me a lot. I've read one book, it's The Captive Mind, and it's about living under totalitarianism. So if you entertain me for a moment, I'm going to step out of our world and say back to somewhere like Poland, 1960s, 1970s, something like that, in a totalitarian regime. And his concept of Ketman is basically saying people learned to play games. People learned to, in a sense, play the system, say the things, be performative in the public space, and then in the private space, if you like. So in the sense, oh yeah, I'm into this and I do this and I want this job for the party and this kind of thing. And then they would then enter into the private space, kind of close the door, and the game is over. The game is over, and now I can, in a sense, I can get out my chess set. He gives little examples like this, and pretend that a member, his boss in the party is one of the chess pieces, and throw it against the wall, kind of like this, and play these kind of games. Now, the reason why I cite that is because, it might sound very grand, but have we, with this data world, invented a kind of new kind of totalitarianism, whereby the offer to play different roles, to put on different masks, becomes all-consuming? So, in a sense, that there isn't much Peter anymore. There's just the different roles. Or certainly if I was younger and I'd grown up in this world, there isn't much, say I was turning 20 now, and I've just lived in this world, then who is me? I've been in this space and I've played these masks and I've played these roles, and there's been these distortion effects. And in a sense, who am I and where am I? And it's the sheer, in a sense, the amount of time spent in this space plus this, as Jo was sort of saying, the opportunity to create a different me that could become all-consuming. So it's not a totalitarianism of the state and the individual now, but in a sense, the low-grade opportunities just to be in a fake world, and just to develop that thought, the fact that it actually takes me more effort to be real me than fake me. Do you see what I mean? And we've sort of turned the world upside down like that. That it actually, I have to work quite hard to begin. If I'm occupied in digital space, I have to work quite hard to be me. And it's actually easier to be fake me. And once that's a decent part of my working or living week, that's actually a new form of system. We've gone over some sort of edge. I hope I'm making some sort of sense. Grounded being, Margaret, Thanks,
You
Vanessa.
feels like a dystopian tomorrow or today. I mean, I'm a mother with young daughters, and I see it amongst their friends. I hope I don't see it as much with my children, but I have seen that, especially the ones that are how they engage with social media is a different version of who they are every day, but they have not matured in who they are every day. So the real physical self has a stunted growth because they have not lived in a real world and allowed that self to grow.
Embodied and embedded.
Yeah. And that's a scary truth. I know we were talking a little bit about children today and protecting the children. I think that part of what they are engaging with and how they are engaging with these tools and these technologies is probably the scariest future.
Psychosis. That's where it leads.
Yeah, absolutely. This has to be a number one topic, I think, for our children and our grandchildren. It's also coupled to the actual physical effects of being in front of a screen in a flat world. And there's so many dimensions to this. And I just think it's so vitally important. Peter, I think your explanation was superb and provocative in many respects, as I'm sort of examining myself, like, who am I today? Or who do I want to be? And this issue of realness, I mean, even here we have a transatlantic conversation going on. And I wonder, as we discuss, Peter, how can, and that's my question, I suppose I'll just segue into, is how can the uniqueness of the UK-based Cybernetics Society, with the legacy of, people like Stafford Beer and Ross Ashby and Gordon Pask and many, many others, play a role in wrestling with these issues going forward after this session? That's the question I would pose to you, Geoff and Jo, if I could.
So just for transparency, and I quote Posywad every time I talk to anyone about anything to do with digital identity, because it because, to your point, Margaret, it grounds everyone. Everyone understands that, and it's really good to say that in Google offices as well, because do no evil. Okay, let's explore that. I don't get invited often, but I think there's quite a lot that we can bring with heft, because it's about self-governance, and what some of this movement is seeking to, what some of this architecture is starting to seek to do, is to bring things more self-sovereign, to try and get some reclamation. That comes with all sorts of challenges, Margaret and Vanilla, which you both have.
But it's actually even worse than this, because there is a biological, neurological thing that goes on. So when your eyes are stationary and focused, and you're standing still, it's very easy for the amygdala to become hyper active. Your fear, your anxiety, all of that. When you're moving forward and your eyes are scanning the environment, your amygdala shuts down. You're able to be in a state of clear mind. The other factor is people don't understand that blue light activates certain pathways that help to make your dopamine.
Yeah.
And affects how much dopamine you production, which makes you basically more controllable.
Yeah.
And it's not even the screen or it's the actual light itself, because we are biological beings. We are physical, biological beings, and we are significantly impacted by the design of this technology on the physical level, on the neurobiological level. Forget about all the abstract psychological formation of anything to do with us.
And
on the very functionality of what it is to be human and how we learn and how we become. This is affecting us.
Yeah, and
this is a certain invasion of being, of becoming.
Yeah, invasion of being and becoming. Absolutely right. And I have witnessed it over the last 24 years with grandchildren growing up.
Mm.
It concerns me deeply. And how do you raise these issues with parents? How do you raise these issues with the children themselves? Particularly when you talk about, as you do, Margaret, and we've been discussing this, the inherent biological changes that are going on, which therefore present even additional challenges to all of the topics we've talked about today. This biological groundedness. I mean, I make a point of taking my shoes off every day and walking on the grass, just as a simple little act of remembrance. But, you know, that kind of thing about our humanness, or giving people hugs, for example. I mean, and I mean, I think your point there about horizon scanning and the eye movement, you know, it's an imperative to get out there and walk, isn't it? So anyway.
And we can solve things better when we're moving. We've had amazing insights in science and philosophy when people have been conversing and talking together, walking together out in nature. Right. So that there's a kind of, how do we actually start, if you're looking at preserving agency, preserving this creative function of ourselves upon which all this technology feeds, then, okay, perhaps we'll evolve technology that does that. But then how do we, I'm going to use a word, I'm not religious, but how do we preserve this sacred nature of our humanity?
Absolutely.
This really beautiful, essential thing about being a living creature.
That's exactly it.
And I think sort of, and Richard's just raised something actually was really interesting, Richard. I'll give you a moment, because you are touching where I was going to talk about, where I think you can go from an educational perspective. And so I'll let you raise that. And to your point, Margaret, actually the self-sovereign movement, when you start to get immersed, the intention is to move away from screens. It is to, I mean, initially, much of the capability will be on these, because the young people carry these around like an appendage, right? And to the point of moving, the whole design around, the whole design around contactless travel is, I can do it like this. You know, I can wave this. You can take, you know, an image of me. You've already got some biometric capability that I can control, you know, on here. That doesn't phone home, but it allows me to be fluid. So the design is to create fluidity. What they haven't considered is opportunity and the kind of all the self-human biological things. They haven't quite considered that. They're just considering the functionality of the transaction of making flights easier.
They're engineers.
Exactly. But there is opportunity to think about the whole end-to-end system. Because so the first thing I said when I sat in a workshop with these guys was, wow, that'd be great in a university. I could put everything I wanted on here and prove I'm a graduate, and I don't have to go through this horrific process of whenever I apply for a job of finding everything and, you know, reconnecting it all. I can just go, here's the token. And actually I can get a discount code, and I can get it, you know, and I've got such a good, you know, qualification, I can actually probably walk into the Royal Society. They know who I am. You know, I can prove some of those things about me without the justification that I have now, because that also has a psychological, you know, impact on individuals. So I think there's opportunity for us there.
Richard, and then you're going to go. Sorry, you're going to go.
You're going to go singularity.
No, you're going to go to embedded marks, where I just scan my wrist, and when in China you just scan your face.
Well, that's.
I mean, but we have to imagine futures like this, because we have to consider them ahead and design and change and, you know, shape.
And that is where singularity you are, by the way. Some of the Silicon Valley stuff is
well, that's what they want, right?
It's
Upload
what they
me
want,
to
right? The embedded,
I
it's
know. I've
embedded
got
in my
friends
brain,
in that movement, and I just think they're
crazy,
nuts. Why do you want to get go of this amazing embodied being you are, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, Richard, did you want to talk about games? Because I think that's really important, actually.
Thanks, Geoff. Can I apologise? I actually had a virtual adapter moment that prevented me get on the conference. So technology is fallible, which is a great message to share, if I may. I suppose going back to the Badlands theme and the whole idea of security cybernetics, security of the self is arguably the lowest recursion that we need to prioritize. We can go beneath that into biological systems within us, but for me, the self is that unit, that really, really important unit of security from which everything else grows. If the theory of security cybernetics stands true, then we are entering a gaming environment that is dynamic, that is probabilistic, and that will present perturbations to self as a system. And I suppose the question around cybernetic society for me is looking at the immense talent and the multidisciplinarity of all of the people on this call. There is combined knowledge there that is perhaps difficult to find elsewhere. So perhaps cybernetic society is in a relatively strong position. I wouldn't say unique, but a relatively strong position to kind of start breaking these issues down and looking at the game from a position of not winning. It's not zero sum, it's an infinite game where security, safety of the self becomes a fundamental priority. That was really the point I wanted to raise, Geoff, and I don't know if that was where you were going, but we can build on the self then to look at higher games, higher levels of recursion. And my apologies, sorry.
No, carry on, sorry.
Please.
No, I was gonna. I think that would be a really powerful thing for this group to be able to the what could we do, what could we contribute, is that because I don't see enough of that when I move around in this space and I do some advisory, and I go in as an ethics advisor, so I talk about morality and all of the good things, a lot of the good things Margaret's raised. But at the end of the day, a lot of the designs are to create something transactional. And not everyone thinks about the holistic environment necessarily, and you can game that, then you can in a safe way learn and educate and redesign and and repurpose. And I think the nature of cybernetic society is perfect for exactly that. And
it sounds tangible.
Right? Absolutely. And bring some tangible qualitative commentary into the space as well. And that's what I was kind of hoping would get asked. If I'm honest, and that's to you, Peter. Actually, that's something I was hoping that maybe we could explore further.
I mean, I think it's just wonderful in a way that the debate. I think nice point, Margaret. Apartheid and so on and so forth. How forms of society affect us. I think it's just sort of fabulous, great point you raised, Richard. Really great point, and I think that. One thing I'd like to do before we finish, though, is just to help us with that next step, is to revisit some of those architectural diagrams that we were putting up there, Geoff.
Yeah, I mean, I have others that I deleted, which I will send to you.
No, I mean even that's quite good. That's great, because that's also the way in which we've built systems with so many shortcuts and so on and so forth, so much functionality. It's almost psychotic now, the way in which each new version of operating systems have so much more stuff that literally you kind of you look at the front door and you've hit the key and you've deleted your stuff these days. You know, it's like they're so feature packed. It's a sort of, but it's telling you about the paradigm behind the systems. But the point being is that when we look at those ecosystems, I don't know if we can get them up, Peter T, or anything like that. But when we look at those ecosystems, no big worry. But are we then, in a sense, as users, able to knowingly choose between different ecosystems and walk among them? Yeah,
that's the intent.
Yeah,
so that we start to create the picture of intent that, you know, Tim his, you know, the ideology of when the web was first founded around how the data would be purposely shared. It's that intentional rather than the noise and the protecting, you know, the attention.
So I love this. So the kind of back to that kind of Tim Berners-Lee of the empowered person.
Yeah.
And that empowered person walks in ecosystems, woodland, if you like, of his or her choosing, and has that kind of environment around them. But when I saw that, I flagged that to Rich, because I think one of the interesting things is, and I think this is where we as a community really do have something, because when you look at that as a point of view of then proving what happened later, you know, so you have some need to prove what happened later, it just becomes more and more complex in a way, or potentially. And this is, let's say, some of the issues that we were touching upon in Bush House, but Jonathan's issues with violence against women and girls and so on and so forth. So-and-so found themselves in this ecosystem and thought it was that ecosystem, that kind of thing. Or we have, if they had been in this ecosystem, we'd have had the data to prove this happened, but they were in this ecosystem. Do you see what I mean? So I love it as a concept, but I think we've got something to explore there. Yeah, I'm speaking on Richard's behalf in a way.
May I come in and add something there, Pete?
Yeah. I mean,
I think
just by
got 5. Is that all right?
Richard ran a lot of this stuff in the UK policing side.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll be brief because of time. So 10 years ago, I gave evidence in Parliament in relation to a new power called Internet Connection Records, which was the highly intrusive power contained in the investigatory powers legislation at the time. As I was giving evidence, Mr. Snowden was tweeting how intrusive and awful ICRs were. And it's that balance, isn't it? It's security and privacy. The reality of the game is that ICRs, if you look at Lord Anderson's review a couple of years ago, they're still not delivered. And they're not delivered because of the complexity of the data. And perhaps that's the nature of the environment, Geoff, that you've put up. In some environments, provability is a real challenge now in terms of the states providing security and safety for its citizens. So I think even the understanding of the debate need to be raised, because there are some safer zones. I'm not going to call them safe zones. And there are some zones where the levels of citizen expectation of being secure through the criminal justice process, etc., you know, they're very, very thin. They're very wobbly, and incredibly difficult. So that's a data variety complexity issue that I think feeds into this. We're dealing with some. And back to the point around the Cybernetics Society, I think we are perhaps well positioned to explore those kinds of variety and come out with some concrete suggestions around security in its widest sense and protection of the self as a system as well. Thank you.
Wonderful.
And we could take that for influence. Then Peter, we could then use that for influence into some of our governing bodies, because as I said at the start, the data bill that's just been part, it's got identity wrapped through it. But I don't think there's enough conversation about, there's a transactional thought about what it might do, but I think that's often driven economically and not necessarily from a citizenship perspective. So, Margaret.
So, Jo, yes, if you don't mind, I have a question around the terminology. What is the significance of using the word person, personhood, versus identity?
Interesting.
Is that just a...
No, it's a dinkum. How would you regulate differently than legally if you had to use that? Just because we talk about the environment versus nature, for example, right? And it completely shifts your perspective, because the one is something you have an intimate relationship with. The one is something that you see as something you use. It's a resource. Identity is a resource. It's something you use. Personhood is something you be.
Much more individual.
Much more unique.
Yeah, exactly.
Instantiated in an embodied being, right? Of some kind. Yeah, of some kind. It changes things a bit.
I hadn't considered that personally, so thank you for raising that, because I'd not.
But the regulations aren't written for personhood.
No,
they're not. They're working.
And maybe that's the thing around being safe versus being private. Maybe that's about
absolutely, that's interesting.
Security versus protection. And so on and so forth. So we need to sort of
this is like a whole other like conversation that we could spend hours on. It's mind blowing, because it picks up off of what you started with, right?
Multifaceted,
makes us unique. Yeah,
I think we really should, with the Cybernetics Society of the UK, build off of this conversation to identify further conversations that we could have in priority. So I'd sort of ask and engage everybody on this call and anybody listening to the YouTube to contact us and let us know what you think they are, and particularly to Geoff and Jo to kind of help us shape that engagement. I mean, I'm personally committed to it, and I think we all need to be. Peter, do you want to talk about pineapples?
Is it time to finish? Are we done?
It's definitely time to finish. I mean, I think basically, to everyone here, thank you. I think it's been fabulous. I think it's like there's so much to go at afterwards. I really hope we can. Jo and Geoff, you're awesome. Really, 100% respect. More than. There's something poetic about the fact that it ended up being quite a small gathering, but so powerful. It's weird how that happens sometimes, like in the sense that sometimes it's just weird that sometimes that it's not when we have the big congregation, but when we have the small congregation that we really actually begin to move something on. So I'm seeing today as a sort of a slightly poetic and magic moment. And I really hope we can contribute to the spaces you're in, Jo and Geoff, as I know that you can contribute to ours. And thank you so much. I felt, like Elena's point about Doge earlier on, there's so much in here, who are the bad guys now? Where's the problematic governance relationship? We're in a phase of the game where it's all around us. It's all around us. And I love what you're doing, by the way, Geoff. I'm asking questions about that kind of ecosystem. But I actually love what you're doing with that and those basic principles. But I do think if we sit together, we can sort of also think it through again. I would be really, really big in some ways and say we're being asked to enter a new age of citizenship, and we're sort of refusing to go.
You need to go.
Sort of thing. We're not ready, but I think that's what's being asked of us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And it was thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
And we'll speak again, I'm sure. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Jo and Geoff, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.